not only a fair judiciary, but one that appears to be fair. What happens if you complain about a programme to the BBC? Well, first of all, your complaint disappears into the BBC and is given to the editor of the programme that you're complaining about. That editor is given the full resources of the BBC at his or her disposal in order to be able to analyse what actually happened. And then they will appear and defend their position in front of a tribunal chosen by the BBC and entirely in secret. You, the complainer, will never know what defences are being brought, so you have no opportunity, A, to know what the defences are, and B, to challenge them and to rebut them. And then, anyway, you're appearing in front of a tribunal which certainly you would assume is entirely partial, because it's chosen by the BBC. These are BBC people. So the entire system is prima facie a joke. Now, it's actually, as Hutton reveals, much worse than that. Because one would have assumed, reading the way the system is described, that at least as part of this process, the facts are at least looked at by the panel. In fact, it turns out that they don't look at the facts at all. They first of all make their decision that the BBC is right and you are wrong, and then they might look at the facts if absolutely forced to. And that's actually what the Hutton report shows. Now, I'm going to just read a tiny extract from, if I can find it. Here we are, Gavin Davis. He actually said, he was challenged, now this is really remarkable. I'll just come on to the relevance of this. Assuming that the complaints procedure doesn't work, the ultimate appeal is the Board of Governors. Now, the Board of Governors sits on top of the BBC, and in theory, one of their duties is to be the regulator. That is to say, the not entirely external body that makes sure the BBC sticks to its charter. This is the final backstop defence that the British public and the other 152 countries that receive BBC coverage have as their defence for inaccuracies in the BBC reporting. And there was a degree of complaint when Gavin Davis, who was seen as a Labour friend and a personal friend of Blair, was appointed as the chairman of the Board of Governors. And you would think that such a person, when receiving a complaint from the Prime Minister, not just any Joe Public, but the Prime Minister, and a complaint not that you didn't report what I said about university fees accurately, but a report saying, you've called me a liar, as a result of which you're saying that the deaths of our boys in Iraq are on my guilty conscience because I lied to the House of Commons. You would think under those circumstances that the regulators would think that it's incumbent upon themselves to take the report, to take the complaint seriously. Not a bit of it. They actually said, and this is Gavin Davis being interviewed, so I hope you will agree that whatever emerges about the precise details of the 45 minutes claim, at the centre of the debate was a claim that Blair made that weapons of mass destruction could be made ready for battle within 45 minutes. So Gavin Davis says that whatever emerges about the precise details of the 45 minutes claim, the details for that, you read the word, for the facts, we must not give any ground which threatens the fundamental independence of our news output or suggests that the governors have buckled to government pressure. He then goes on, when he's questioned as to whether that was an appropriate response, instead of recognising that actually that wasn't an appropriate response, he actually defends his position, and he says, whatever emerges on the 45 minutes claim, what we must not do is to give ground that threatens the fundamental independence of our news output. So, right or wrong on the 45 minutes, we must not buckle under government pressure. Right or wrong. The BBC, right or wrong. He is not interested in the facts. He doesn't care about the facts. The facts are irrelevant. He is a total BBC man, and the BBC must defend itself. Now, for a little light reading, I'm actually here on holiday. For a little light reading, I brought the Hutton report. I can lend you a copy when I finish. To give an idea of the degree of arrogance that the BBC has, this is before Hutton, there was a Defence Commission report, and their findings included: we conclude that Alistair Campbell did not play any role in the inclusion of the 45 minutes claim in the September dossier. We conclude that on the basis of the evidence available to Alistair Campbell did not exert or seek to exert improper influence on the drafting of the September dossier. We further concluded that in the absence of reliable evidence that intelligence personnel have either complained about or sought to distance themselves from the content of the dossier, allegations of politically inspired meddling cannot credibly be established. In other words, all the allegations that Gilligan made, that the BBC, that this 45-minute claim was put in by Blair or by Alistair Campbell, that the the Intelligence Commission was dead against it, and that it was a lie and they knew it was a lie. The FAC found all of that was wrong. The BBC's response on reading that reply: we believe the decision to highlight the circumstances surrounding the 45-minute claim has been vindicated. What? That, it's here. This is their press release, the BBC's press release. It's almost staggering that they can say that. Now, as another bit of evidence, they actually said that they don't believe that they've ever alleged that the government was lying. And yet, Gilligan, they defend Gilligan, they said absolutely clearly, we've never alleged the government was lying. Here's Gilligan's report, which they're defending. And it says, well, the 45 minutes isn't just a detail. It did go to the heart of the government's case that Saddam was an imminent threat, and it was repeated 4 times in the dossier, including by the Prime Minister himself in the foreword. So I think it probably does matter. Clearly, you know, if it was wrong, things are got wrong in good faith. But if they knew it was wrong before they actually made the claim, that's perhaps a bit more serious. Well, if that isn't an allegation of lying, I don't know what is. He's clearly saying they knew it was wrong. They were lying. Later on, the BBC denies that anything they ever said was a lie. So what we have is a massively strong, powerful opinion former that has no systems of redress at all. None at all. It's worth just, this is just a tiny excerpt of the summary of Hutton, just so one can see what Hutton found. By the way, Hutton is being put about in the world press, and certainly in the UK press, as a whitewash. I can only suggest that the people who are saying that have not read the report properly, because it's an extremely, as much of it as I have read, is closely reasoned, well reasoned, and extremely well supported by the evidence. And it's been put together by one of the most senior and respected judges in the UK, who has no axe to grind that anyone thought when he was appointed, and has now retired. So it doesn't appear to be trying to advance his career in any particular way. His findings include the following expressions. The allegation reported by Mr. Gilligan was unfounded. The BBC was at fault in a number of respects. The BBC failed to ensure proper editorial control, so the journalists criticised, the editors criticised. The editorial system was defective. The BBC management was at fault. We've got to the management level now. There was failing to investigate properly and adequately, a failure of the BBC management to appreciate, blah, blah, unreasonable for the BBC management to expect, a defect in the BBC's management system. Now we're going to go up to the governors. Kadosh Kadoshim, the governors failed. Not the correct view of the governors to take. The governors are to be criticised. Failure to give proper and adequate consideration, the BBC should publicly acknowledge, blah, blah. On every single level, journalists, editors, managers, governors, the BBC was totally failing, getting it completely wrong, and defending its behaviour right the way through. So, my thesis, really, is in terms of where one goes from here, is to say that the BBC is actually as the heading in my this article states, really a danger to democracy. It's astonishing that, and one has to accept that any journalist is going to have a view, whether it's left, right, middle, whatever it is, it's a view on any topic. And what the BBC is doing is giving a £4 billion advantage to that view. Now, if you can imagine any political party being given a £4 billion advantage within any democratic society, there would be an absolute outcry. But that's really what's happening. It's not a political party, but it has a set of views, and it's being given an astonishing advantage to those views, whatever they might happen to be, and it's beyond redress. Nobody either can, or if the few people that can, would dare actually to redress this terrible imbalance. So what we have...
Wasn't Gilligan forced to resign? I mean, because of that?
Gilligan was a lowly journalist, and he was forced to resign. But what the BBC is doing, I think, is they are going to put some Band-Aid on the wounds. They are not going to do what needs to be done, which is, what you've got here is a massive monopoly which is clearly capable of abusing its power, and in fact is abusing its power. It's doing it in a subtle way, but it's doing it in an extremely dangerous way. And indeed, the subtlety increases the level of danger. What I actually think you need is a systemic change. And I'm now getting beyond the realm, way beyond the realm of analysis of the actual output, and saying there is no real justification to have a monopoly of any description of this size and power in any field in a democracy. But Calver-Holmeyer, there's no justification for that in the field of media, which is the most sensitive field of all. There is absolutely no reason why the BBC needs to remain publicly funded monopoly of this kind. And there is no reason why systems cannot be found, both to have an external, powerful regulator that has no dependence whatsoever on the BBC and is judicially trained, so they can actually tell the difference between fact and fiction. They actually know what a fact is when they're looking for it. And also, there is no reason why the news production system cannot be broken up. If, for example, I mean, the railways in England are a public joke because they've been run so badly, but they were privatised, and various different companies were allowed to bid for a franchise, that they can run certain parts of the railways for a few years, and there's a regulator which will punish them for being late or for having the trains untidy or having them fall off the track and things of that kind, the number of deaths that they cause. These all lead towards their record book and will result in them being punished in some way or losing the franchise. I don't see that there is a reason why one cannot have 3 or 4 possibly publicly funded, there's £4 billion around so one can spend the money, publicly funded news production agencies that are actually competing to comply with the terms of the Charter, that are actually saying to each other, you've broken the Charter 5 times and I've only broken it 3. That's competition. And then you're actually competing for quality of accuracy of news, and you would then have a true system much more along the lines that are compatible with a modern democratic state. Those are the principal points that I want to make. If anybody has specific questions, I'm very happy to take them, but thank you very much indeed.
Well, one question was put to me underhand whether you could explain the difference between the complaint system of the BBC and that of the Spanish Inquisition. If that's too difficult, or if the differences are too insignificant.
My Spanish isn't up to it. So.
Okay, we'll take questions now. Daniel Doron.
Good morning, Mr. Asserson. Welcome to Israel. In the material that I sent you, there are instances of clear lies. Could those instances leverage into some other action where they were actually caught lying telling untruth. Another matter, as you recall, there is one outstanding segment in which they promoted an anti-Semitic calumny about the Jewish people. I'm referring to a segment that was done on the killing of Palestinian children, and that started with shots of a mound of skulls, adult skulls, mind you, in a church in Bethlehem. And Hilary Anderson, the BBC correspondent in Israel at that time, started by saying, here is where a massacre, one of the most vile massacres in history, took place. Herod's massacre of the innocents. And from there, the camera cut out to Manger Square, where a funeral was taking place of a Palestinian boy that was shot through the head, according to the BBC, gangster style, by Israeli forces, and of course with no reason. And a line was explicitly made between the Jews trying to kill the child Christ and the killing of Palestinian children. If this is not anti-Semitic incitement, I don't know what is. And I wonder whether there are other fora besides the British court system, international fora, where one could press some kind of charges, and perhaps one should try the American venue. The BBC broadcasts through the courtesy of NPR in America, incidentally, doing tremendous damage. I think we are asleep, not realizing what NPR and the BBC are doing to our support in America. Believe me, it's a slow process, but it's a process that is slowly eroding the moral support for Israel in America. Now, perhaps America is the venue. The American courts are the venue of suing the BBC. There you have, different courts, and maybe different kind of results can be attained.
Please.
The other thing, one more thing, if I may. Maybe it's time for the Israeli public to wake up. We are the main culprit of this, and we are just ignoring it. Any community that has been exposed to such an attack would respond. We have a lot of civic action ways of doing it. Sit-ins, pickets, and I think it can have an effect. So perhaps people here want to think also about, besides complaining and shedding tears about the BBC, what we can do to make their life in Israel a little less easy and a little less pleasant, and bring through this what they do to the attention of other media in the world. Thank you.
Next is Chaim Assis, but we take the questions one by one. Can you pass the mic?
You're asking obviously the crucial question: how can one actually deal with this problem? And I started this project thinking that I would gather sufficient evidence to bring proceedings against the BBC and find some body and some support to do that. I doubt that I can find a body that truly represents the Jewish people in England to be able to do that. I'm not convinced I can. And I'm not convinced that it would be easy to win a case. It would be risky and very, very expensive. People have expressed a concern of putting Israel on trial, and that would be quite a dangerous exercise given the general mood within the UK at the moment. And therefore, that's why I've, in my own thinking, changed tack to some degree. And I think that what the BBC's most powerful weapon is, as I said earlier, is its brand. It has a brand of truth and accuracy. That brand has been holed below the waterline by Hutton. And I think that what the tactic should be, insofar as one sees it as a tactic, the strategy perhaps should be, is publicly to embarrass the BBC, to demonstrate that that brand has been soiled. When Perrier was found to be producing beautiful water but actually had poison in it, it was bad for the brand. that's what the BBC is producing. It's producing poison. And we've got to demonstrate to the world somehow that not just on the Middle East story, although the Middle East story is its biggest news story, it's the biggest news story in the world, and it's the longest running news story in the world. And news is the most interesting part of the BBC's charter. That's the bit where most of the charter actually bites. So Middle East is absolutely central to the brand. If the BBC can be shown publicly time and again, can be humiliated in public, where people can bring complaints, then I think that that is a very powerful way. If there are pickets outside the BBC, I was telephoned the day before I came here by a Lubavitch rabbi who doesn't have a television, but occasionally listens to the radio. And he rang me in an outrage and said he wants to go with a couple of Dayanim and picket outside the BBC. I said, go ahead, do it. You know, I think that would make an amazing picture. It would be extraordinary to see a few Dayanim standing outside the BBC saying, you know, you're lying, whatever they're going to say. It'd probably be written in Hebrew, or Yiddish, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. The fact that they're there would be tremendous. The BBC has to be embarrassed publicly, time and time again. I've got a tiny report here. I was just driving along. This is the season of goodwill, the 24th of December, 1:30 in the afternoon. And you have the BBC interviewing Amr Moussa, the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, talking about Iraq, talking about a bomb, and a suicide bomb that's just gone off in Iraq, and what the problems are, and how difficult it is to control the process, and how the Americans aren't managing it, etc., etc. And the BBC, don't forget, you're not allowed as a BBC journalist to ever to show your personal feelings. And this is what Nick Clark, the BBC interviewer, at the 1 o'clock news, their major news slot during the day on Radio 4, Amr Moussa has not mentioned Palestine or Israel at all. And in relation to one question by Nick Clark, he says, well, we don't know about whether there are terrorists in Iraq. The information coming out of Iraq about the resistance, about the protests, about so many other things makes the picture a bit blurred. Nick Clark for the BBC. I agree with you about the confusion, but let me put it another way. Do you think people in the Arab world generally regard those fighting a rearguard action against American occupation? Will they be seen as terrorists, or rather as Palestinians might be, as people resisting an improper occupation of their territory? Now, you know, what on earth is going on here? The president of the Arab League doesn't feel a need to bring in Israel into this debate, and that disappoints the BBC, so he has to bring it in and create a platform for him, Amr Moussa, then to go on and make some horrible allegations about Israel. But Nick Clark is stating quite clearly here that he considers the Palestinians to be freedom fighters and to be distinguished from other terrorists.
I'm Assis, Ambassador Gold.
I wanted to ask you what the Jewish community is doing, because in the past, I remember the students' organization reacted very quickly to certain reports about Israel, and it was effective at that time. I remember, for example, when there was a series on the Arab refugees, the Palestinian refugees, Jews from the Arab countries reacted, complained, and they were given, after a month, the possibility to present a program of half an hour on the Jewish refugees from Arab countries. I wanted to give an example also from France. Also, I think government-owned channel, Antenne 2, once created a program similar to the BBC Panorama. They called it even Panorama. It was systematically anti-Israeli, and it gave almost every other month a report, a biased report on Israel. The students picketed near the offices of Antenne 2, demonstrated, and then they gathered 20,000 signatures.